His legs are screaming. He's been standing like this for over 2 hours now. One foot wedged against a bent fork of a submerged cypress sapling, the other braced against another tree, barely thicker than his wrist. Both feet are numb. His left hand grips a third tree, thin as a flagpole, and every time the wind gusts, the whole thing sways around like it's about to snap, leaving him wobbling back and forth like a tightrope walker in an effort to maintain his balance. He can't put his feet down. If he does, the water comes up to his chest, and in 62-degree water in November, no shirt, no shoes, and a Florida storm raging all around you, hypothermia isn't a possibility. It's a countdown. The reeds around him stretch in every direction like a green and golden ocean towering over his head, bending and whipping in the wind. He can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. Just reeds, just swamp, just water. And the ants? Oh, God, the ants. They come in waves, little floating rafts made of their own bodies. And when they hit him, they don't hesitate. They swarm. They bite. His arms, his neck, his back, his scalp. They're in his hair, his beard. He's swatting them off. He's trying to get them off of him, but they just keep coming. It's like the river itself is trying to devour him, one fiery sting at a time. A couple 100 yards upstream and across the river, through the wall of reeds, his boat sits wedged in the grass, useless, unreachable, with his phone, his safety gear, his dry clothes, salvation. Downstream a half a mile away, and also on the opposite side of the river, there's a small hunting, fishing campsite. It's abandoned this time of year, but it's dry land in an expanse of wetlands and swamps. He's thought about swimming for it. He knows most people in this situation wouldn't have been able to resist the taunt of nearby safety. But Brandon knows better. The black, turbulent waters of the St. Johns River are ruled by gators. He knows this because he was hunting them himself on this same stretch of river just 10 days earlier. The gators are spooked, sure. They've been dodging hunters all season. They're still here, waiting, watching. And if he tries to swim, he'd be bobbing like a fishing cork in murky water with no visibility, thrashing like wounded prey. He'd be making their job easy. And that's at the shock of the frigid, fast-moving water and the exhaustion that it induces doesn't drown him first. So he stands, shivering, burning all over from ant bites, balancing on two bent saplings in the middle of a Florida swamp with storms rolling in and no one expecting him home until well after dark. No phone, no flare, no dry land, no civilization for miles, no way out. Just Brandon, utterly alone, endless swamp, and the thin, fading hope that someone, anyone, might come. So he did the only thing he could do. He prayed, intensely he prayed. To understand how Brandon ended up here, alone and fighting for his life in one of the most unforgiving places on planet Earth, we would have to go back to the night before. But before we do that, let me take a second to welcome you guys to another episode of the Southern Drawl Podcast. We hope that you're enjoying this story that we're telling. This is a part of a new series that we're going to be doing here on the podcast. We hope that you'll enjoy the series and leave in the comments your thoughts on how we're doing. Also, subscribe to the channel and share it with anybody that you think might enjoy the kind of things we do here. With that said, we're going to jump right back into the story right now on the Southern Drawl Podcast. 12 hours earlier, the night sky was clear and a light, chilly breeze slithered its way through the trees that surrounded Brandon's oversized driveway where he stores his boat and his other outdoor toys. At 30-something years old, Brandon was a husband and a father of 4 daughters. During the week, he worked in healthcare, operating rooms, steady hours, good benefits, kind of job that provided for his family and kept the lights on. But on his off days, that was when Brandon was really Brandon. Fishing, hunting, hiking, wild hogs, deer, alligator. If it moved through the Florida wilderness, Brandon had tracked it, scouted it, or had had it in his crosshairs at some point. He'd been doing this since he was a kid. From the farm fields and the pine flats of South Georgia to the swamps, rivers, and the oceans of Florida, this wasn't just a hobby for him. It was in his blood, a connection to his Native American heritage. It ran deeper than any job title ever could. It was during these activities that Brandon felt closest to God. And it wasn't just about the thrill. Brandon and his family, they lived off the land. The deer he harvested, the fish they caught, that meat, that filled their freezer. It fed his daughters. It was another way he provided, and Brandon took pride in that, real pride. He was good at it, too. He knew how to read the water, how to move through the bush without making a sound, how to handle a boat in tight channels where the wrong turn could leave you high-centered in the mud. He spent hundreds of hours out on the St. Johns River. He knew its moods, its rhythms, its dangers. He felt invincible out there. That Thursday evening, Brandon was in his driveway prepping his boat. This wasn't just another trip. This was the trip of the year. That weekend marked the only open hunting days of a massive public hunting property, accessible only by boat via the St. Johns. Brandon and a buddy had it all planned out. See, they were going to drive the boat down Friday morning, haul in all their gear, set up the camp, then they just boat in and out each day to hunt. It was going to be perfect. Then his phone rang. His friend was canceling. Work came up, family obligations, something. It didn't really matter. Point was, Brandon's hunting partner was out. Most guys would have called it, rescheduled, waited for another season. But Brandon? Man, hell no. Brandon wasn't most guys. He'd been looking forward to this for months. The property was primo. The weather window was narrow. He didn't need a partner to do what he'd been doing his whole life. So, Friday morning, before the sun came up, Brandon loaded up his boat, kissed his wife, and headed out, alone. Friday morning didn't start the way Brandon had hoped. When he stepped outside, the weather had obviously deteriorated. The sky looked angry, low, heavy clouds churning overhead. Cold drizzle hung in the air, getting pushed around by gusts of wind. Brandon stood there for a moment weighing his options, and he pulled out his phone and checked the forecast. Light rain, cloudy, clearing around 11 a.m. He could work with that. So he loaded up, headed to the boat ramp, arriving a little after 8 a.m., later than he had planned, but not dangerously so. The ramp was mostly deserted. Just 3 other boats loading up, their owners packing it in after a failed duck hunt. The weather obviously chased them off. Brandon looked out at the water, looked up at the sky, considered the forecast one more time, and he backed his boat down the ramp. After a quick launch, he was on the water, motoring south down the winding St. Johns River toward Lake Poinsett. It's a massive open body of water he'd need to cross to reach Middle River. From there, it was a narrow, twisting and turning waterway that's surrounded by endless swampland the rest of the way down to Lake Winder, where the hunting property sat waiting. 12 miles one way. He's done this run plenty of times. About a third of the way across Lake Poinsett, he noticed something. A dark wall moving across the water toward him. The storm front was heavier than the forecast had promised, and it was coming fast. Brandon's hand instinctively went to grab a life jacket. But when he looked around the boat, his heart dropped. There ain't one there. In all of his excitement that morning, in his haste to get the boat launched and get on the water, he'd packed everything for the hunt. Everything. His rifle, his gear, his calls, his camo, but nothing for the boat ride. No life jacket, no locator beacon, no radio, no backup plan. For a split second, he thought about turning around, going back, doing this the right way. The thought passed almost as quickly as it came. He was already a third of the way across. Forecast said it would clear. And besides, if he could just make it to Middle River where the channel narrowed and the trees broke up the wind, he'd get some relief from the chop. So he pressed on. The storm hit hard. The waves slapped against the hull of his flat-bottomed John boat, sloshing water over the sides. Rain poured down in sheets, filling the bottom of the boat with inches of cold water. He glanced down at his hunting boots sitting next to his gear, and he felt a flicker of concern. If those get soaked on the inside, I'd be hunting with wet feet all day. But he had a rule he'd stuck to his whole life. Never wear boots in the boat. If you need to swim, they'll drag you down. Still, he wasn't planning on swimming today, and he sure as hell didn't want soggy feet. So he slid his knee-high snake boots onto his bare feet and left them untied, just for now. He'd been wearing flip-flops. He also slipped his cell phone into the waterproof pouch inside of his hunting pack to protect it from the ongoing monsoon. Eventually, mercifully, he reached the south end of Lake Poinsett and slipped into Middle River. The wind eased, the water calmed, and Brandon exhaled. Smooth sailing from here, at least he thought. He throttled forward, snaking his way south through the winding channel, rain still hammering down, but the waves finally manageable. Took a moment to assess his boat. There was a lot of water in the bottom, more than he expected. He passed a small dock, a hunting camp tucked back up in the trees. For a second, he thought about stopping, bailing out the boat, taking a breath. But he kept going. rounded another hairpin turn in the river, the kind of tight bend where the current bunches up and gets confused. Through the blinding rain, he saw something ahead. It was a swell. Not big, maybe a foot and a half. Just a ripple where the water was folding over itself and disturbed by the current pushing into the turn. It didn't look like much, but Brandon's boat was a flat-bottom boat, a John boat. Flat-bottom boats don't like swells. The boat slammed into the water with a violent crack. Brandon jolted forward, his body lurched forward, and he slid right out of the wet seat. His hand slipped right off of the tiller handle, the steering lever that's attached to the motor. It was only for a second, but a second was all it took. The tiller whipped violently to the right, spinning the motor 90 degrees, perpendicular to the direction of travel of the boat. Brandon's eyes went wide. He lunged for the tiller handle. He just did grab it, but it was too late. The boat obeyed the motor's commands and wrenched hard to the right, momentum and physics colliding, a split-second disaster. Brandon went airborne, catapulted skyward. For a moment, he recalled looking down at his boat without him in it and having only one thought. If I don't get these boots off of my feet, I'm gonna die. He actually flew out of the boat, launched high above the water like a rag doll. His arms flailing, his brain screaming, the world spinning in a blur of gray sky and dark water. Then he hit. Cold didn't just shock him, it stung, like hundreds of bees attacking all at once. He fought the urge to gasp, knowing if he did, his lungs would fill with river water. He plunged deep beneath the black water surface, expecting to hit a bottom that never came. As he kicked and he stroked his arms toward the surface, he noticed how clearly he was processing the situation, truly hyper-aware of every detail. He was acutely aware of the cold, of course, but also the dimly lit, clouded sky disappearing above as the murky water overtook him. The boots, they were dragging him down like anchors. And the lightweight sports fabric long-sleeve hunting shirt he was wearing ballooned out like a parachute, the fabric catching water, tangling, making every movement harder. He could feel every ounce of resistance, every wrong decision he'd made that morning, compounding in this moment. And just then, he surfaced, gasping, choking, his vision clearing just enough to see his boat was gone. Well, almost gone. Driving by about 10 yards out of reach at about half throttle, headed upriver. The thought of swimming after the boat entered just long enough to be dismissed for the fatal endeavor that it was. He was freezing, struggling to stay above water, and in the middle of a weather-battered river channel and a 50-yard swim to either edge. So he just started swimming. A voice in his head, calm, clear, almost not his own, repeated over and over, just swim and breathe, swim and breathe, swim and breathe. The water burned like fire, and his lungs betrayed him with every desperate gasp. Exhaling felt impossible, and each inhale, a struggle, like trying to take another breath when your lungs are already full. His heart hammered in his chest. His body screamed for oxygen, yet the icy grip of the water stole it away. He kept swimming. His muscles burned and were wearing out fast. He still had at least 30 yards to go, and the boots, those damn snake boots, were still dragging him down. He tried kicking them off. Once, twice, 3 times. They wouldn't budge. His head kept dipping under with each stroke. Exhaustion was setting in. He realized, with cold clarity, that if he didn't do something different and do it now, he wasn't going to make it. He knew that whatever he did, it had to be the right decision, because any errors now could be life-ending. He rolled over onto his back and started backstroking, and immediately it was easier. His head stayed above water. He could breathe, actually breathe, without choking. Swim and breathe, still repeating within. On the 4th stroke, his right foot accidentally kicked the heel of his left foot, just kind of caught it unintentionally. The boot launched off of his foot. Hope suddenly surged through him like electricity. He kicked at the other foot once, twice, 3 times, and finally, He was barefoot and praising God for it. Brandon kept going on his back, pacing himself, trying to slow his breathing, despite the adrenaline, screaming through his veins. Finally, he was only 6, maybe 8 yards away from the edge. Not a bank, not solid ground, just a wall of reeds and tall grass stalks submerged, surrounded by swampland and wetlands stretching for miles in every direction. But it was something. He flipped over and he swam hard, reaching, trying to grasping for anything to hold on to. A single reed. That's what his hand found. He caught it just as he felt the current starting to pull him further downstream. And it held. Barely. He grabbed it with his other hand. And he pulled himself closer, hand over hand, fighting the tug of the river. And then his foot kicked something. And his blood ran cold. Log, rock, gator. His foot found it again. Solid, unmoving. It's a ledge, a submerged bank that had been carved into the channel during the dry season when the water level had dropped low. He stepped up onto the ledge and stood for the first time, chest deep at the edge of the flowing St. Johns River, catching his breath, watching the reeds blow like ocean waves in every direction. Brandon knew he had to get out of this water. Hypothermia was going to be a real danger if he was out there very long, and he assessed his surroundings and he noticed a couple of small trees, 8 feet or so back in the reeds. Looking at these trees towering over him from chest deep in the cold water, they looked solid, sturdy. However, as he attempted to put his weight against them, they bowed and bent over like fishing poles. Though they didn't crack or break, they were flimsy. Still, each tree had a branching point, a small Y where the trunk split, just wide enough to put a foot on, to stand on. Once he had his feet positioned, he held onto a third flimsy tree for balance, and he stood up on the 2 bent trees. He was now only waist deep in the cold water. It wasn't much, but again, it was something. He stood there wobbling, his legs shaking, not only from his balance, but from cold, from exhaustion, from the sheer absurdity of what had just happened. And for a moment, his thoughts tried to drag him into despair. My wife and my daughters might not ever know what happened to me. But he quickly shook that off. He had managed to keep his composure, calmly thinking through the river swim. Surviving the remainder of this ordeal would require similar thoughtfulness. He knew that death was a single mistake away, yet somehow, he was at peace with his dire situation. And dire it was. A quick inventory of his pockets reveals a can of grizzly wintergreen, saturated by river water, and a small pocket knife. Wallet's gone. Anything else in the pockets is gone. He had a leather belt holding up his cargo shorts and a .380 Glock pistol in a leather holster on the belt that did survive the swim. No shoes, no phone, no boat. Speaking of the boat, Brandon could still hear it. It had motored a few hundred yards upstream and then beached itself atop the reeds on the opposite side of the river. Out of sight, but close enough to hear the engine purring and idling. The sound an endless siren song calling to him, promising salvation. Come back into the water. You can make it. Just swim. You got this. He resisted, and the storm raged on. As Brandon stood there balancing on his makeshift stilts, he remembered the dock, the hunting camp he'd passed on the way in about half a mile downstream. If he could just float down there, just drift with the current, make it to the other side, climb up onto dry ground. But that's a lot of river to cover. And this stretch of river was crawling with gators. He'd seen several on the boat ride in before everything went sideways. And honestly, he'd been lucky not to attract any gator attention so far, and it was probably best to keep it that way for as long as possible. So he stood and he prayed. After about a half hour, the weather was unchanged. Brandon stood there almost entranced by the rolling waves of the reeds across the river, dancing in the wind currents. He had carefully removed his cargo shorts and his shirt and hung them on a branch to dry. The gun and the belt was slung around his torso, and The tobacco was drained and promptly packed in his bottom lip and currently easing his anxiety. When he leaned out and looked to the right, he could see maybe 400 or 500 yards down the river channel to the left, about 50 yards down to the hairpin turn that launched him into this nightmare. And every now and then he hears the distant roar of an airboat, and they sound so close that they're like about to come roaring around the corner at any moment. But it's an illusion. Things that are far away, miles away even, can sound like they're just right around the corner. Brandon cupped his hands around his mouth and he yelled, "Help! Help! Help!" The neighbors are going to be coming and checking on me. He waited, he listened, and he called again. The sound of his own voice unnerved him. It echoed out across the swamp and it disappeared into nothing. No one could hear him. He had never felt this helpless before. Then, a burning sting in the middle of his back, another on his neck, his chest, everywhere. All of a sudden, they're all over him. Ants, they're coming in waves, little floating rafts made of their own bodies, drifting downstream like little tiny armadas. And when they hit him, they swarmed. He tried swatting them and wiping them away. He tried redirecting their little rafts into the current so that they'd wash downstream, but they just kept coming. More and more, steering straight for him, biting him, burning. And they didn't stop. And neither did Brandon's prayers. Please, God, send me a boat. Send me a savior. Let me see my girls again. More than 2 hours had passed since Brandon went into the water. The rain continued. The ants continued. The balancing act and the shivering continued. The humming boat motor continued. And so did the prayer. Brandon's wife wasn't expecting him home until after dark. If she didn't fall asleep waiting for him, she might not even realize something was wrong until well after sundown. His feet were numb. His body was shutting down. And across that river, just a couple 100 yards away, his boat sat there with everything he needed. Warm, dry clothes, his cell phone, food, a seat. Maybe, just maybe he should try. He carefully lifted his foot off the branch and stepped down into the water. It was deeper than he remembered. Managed to find the bottom and slid in until both feet were flat. Chest deep again. The cold hit him like a fist. He nearly gasped, that same involuntary, terrifying reflex from before. He stood there for a moment, shivering, defeated. Then he climbed back up onto his tree stilts. Help! 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 He could hear the desperation in his own voice. It sounded like a stranger's voice, someone weak and incapable. It terrified him. It couldn't be his voice. It couldn't be his voice calling for help. He's invincible out here. He's never needed help before. Not here. But this time was different. All control, all options, all power, pride, wise ideas, all tools, resources, equipment, all of it stripped away. It humbled Brandon. With tears welling up, he pushed down the emotion and he bowed his head and he prayed. 5:05 a.m., the alarm clock did not go off. It didn't need to. Mark was already awake. He'd been laying there for half an hour listening to the rain drum against his roof. Most people found that sound relaxing, comforting even. Mark just found it annoying today. He worked as a state park ranger and grounds maintenance technician for the Florida Wildlife Commission, and the last few weeks had been brutal. Prepping the grounds for hunting season, working long days, dealing with the usual chaos that came with opening weekend. He'd been looking forward to this day off, really looking forward to it. Mark's only interest in listening to the rainfall today is to keep an ear out for thunder while he looks over the latest forecasts and weather radars. He was supposed to go fishing. Now, lying there in the dark, listening to the rain, he wasn't so sure. He wrestled with it. Is it even worth the hassle? Finally, after much inner debate, Mark made his decision. He was staying home. Warm, dry, comfortable. He rolled out of bed, made some coffee, turned on the TV. Half an hour later, something shifted. Mark couldn't explain it, but suddenly out of nowhere, he felt this urge. Go fishing. Not the kind of go fishing urge that all of us fishermen get. This was different. It didn't make sense. He'd already decided the weather was garbage. The fish probably weren't biting anyway. But the urge wouldn't go away. Maybe just go out to Lake Winder. Give it just 1 hour. Just one. At least then you can say you tried. Mark shook his head. He was just being stubborn. He was going to stick with his gut, and he was going to stay home. But that urge nagged at him. By 8:30 a.m., Mark was backing his boat down the boat ramp. The launch site Mark used was near the south end of Lake Poinsett, close to the mouth of Middle River. Brandon had launched from the extreme north end of the lake, miles away. Mark didn't know it, but he'd slipped into the water just ahead of Brandon that morning, obscured by the storm that was between them, rolling across the lake. And while Brandon fought his way south through the wind and the rain, Mark had motored ahead, reaching Lake Winder long before Brandon. The fishing was slow, painfully slow, like slow for a slow day slow. An occasional bump, a random fish-on moment, barely enough action to justify being out there. But Mark kept at it, better than being stuck at work or sitting at home, I guess. Eventually, Mark began working his way out of Lake Winder and into Middle River again, slowly fishing the edges as the river snaked its way back toward Lake Poinsett. He'd been out there for 3.5 hours now. The weather was unrelenting. Mark pulled on his bright blue rain poncho and squinted through the downpour, his patience wearing thin. He decided he'd fish through the next S-turn and then he'd call it. As he rounded the bend, approaching the last straight run before the turn, something made him pause. He thought he heard something earlier, like 3 loud calls, but he couldn't make out the sound or the direction. But now, he was sure. Someone was screaming for help, and they were close. Mark cut the throttle on the boat and started scanning up and down the river, checking the edges up and down each edge, looking around the bends, looking in the water itself in the channel, looking for anything out of place, looking at the edges of the reeds, and then he saw it. A man? A mostly naked man? Standing awkwardly in the reeds was a naked man waving a pair of cargo shorts like a flag and begging for help. Brandon didn't know how long it had been anymore. He had just finished another desperate round of help calls, hope draining fast, scanning to the left and to the right, about to bow his head and go back into another round of prayer when he saw it. A flash of bright blue, gliding slowly around the bend to his right. At first he thought it was a balloon, a plastic trash bag maybe, caught in the wind. Then it got closer, and Brandon realized that's a person. That's a person. God had answered his prayers. Every emotion he'd been holding back, every ounce of fear, exhaustion, desperation, relief came flooding out all at once. Brandon, he jumped up and hollered. He grabbed his shorts off of the branch and he started waving his, "Hey, I'm over here. Help me, please. I'm right here." And the fisherman in the blue poncho looked up and called back, "I see you. I see you." Mark maneuvered his boat through the reeds, slow and careful, until he was close enough to reach out. Brandon grabbed his hand and pulled himself up onto the boat, collapsing onto the floor, exhausted, shaken. "You okay?" Mark asked him. Brandon doing his best to redress himself in the damp clothing. He nodded. He couldn't speak yet. He just couldn't process what had just happened. He was alive. He couldn't believe that even. Mark handed him a bottle of water. "How long you been out here?" 3, maybe 4 hours, Brandon managed. His voice was hoarse from calling out so many times. Mark's eyes got big. "In this?" Brandon just nodded. Then he remembered. "My boat. It's upstream, like beached in the reeds on the other side of the river." Mark didn't even hesitate. "Well, go get it." So the two started motoring over. They found the boat about 12 feet deep into the reeds, nearly half filled with rainwater. It was heavy, stuck, not moving. Brandon's heart sank. After everything, of course it wouldn't be easy. But Mark reached into his boat and pulled out a portable bilge pump. "Let's get this water out first." They pumped, they pulled, they pushed. Mark had a tow rope. He tied it to Brandon's boat and gunned the engine, dragged it inch by inch by inch through the reeds. When it still wouldn't budge, Mark pulled out a push pole, Get in your boat. Go help me. Push it while I pull. Brandon didn't even hesitate. He hopped over into his boat, started pushing with the pole while Mark was pulling with the boat, and finally, the boat broke free and floated out into the river channel. Brandon thanked Mark over and over. Mark was just astonished that he had rolled up on a situation like this where he was able to help someone. The two shared a few stories and then parted ways. Mark headed on back towards Lake Poinsett. Brandon took a minute to get all of his things together, and then he too started making the trek back. On the way back, Brandon's engine sputtered, and then it died. He was out of gas. Of course he was. And Mark was out of sight. Brandon tilted the gas can at just the right angle, coaxing every last drop of fuel into the tank. The engine fired back up, and it carried him all the way to the north end of Lake Poinsett. Then it died again. This time it died for good. But his trusty trolling motor, barely holding a charge, had just enough battery to limp him the rest of the way around the bends into the boat ramp. When Brandon finally pulled his boat onto that trailer and pulled that boat out of the water, he stood for a minute and just thought about everything that had to happen to get him there. The irony was not lost on him. For those of you who have not figured it out yet, the stranded man in our story, our main character, Brandon, well, he is none other than the host of the Southern Drawl Podcast. Yours truly, me. I didn't tell my family what happened that day. Not right away. I wasn't ready to relive it yet. All I wanted was to hold my girls, to sit with my wife, and to thank God for all that I had. The very next morning, I finally told them the story. And as I did, I tried to show them the hundreds and thousands of ant bites that were all over me. But I could not find a single one anywhere on my body. Not one. I have no explanation for that, guys. None. But one thing became painfully and undeniably clear. I thought nothing could happen to me. I thought I was invincible out there. I'd spent my whole life in the woods, in the swamps, in the rivers, hunting and fishing and surviving. I didn't need a life jacket. I didn't need to wait for my buddy. I didn't need to turn around when the weather got bad. I could handle it. I knew I could handle it. I did it all the time, except this time, I couldn't. And God made sure I knew that. Made very sure. Even after Mark showed up, even after I was rescued, God kept hammering that point home. My boat was stuck. I'm out of gas. My battery's dying. Every step of the way, I was reminded, you are not in control. I sought the Lord that day, standing on those flimsy trees in the middle of a Florida swamp, getting pounded on by a storm, freezing, eaten alive by ants. And he answered me. He sent a man who just happened to change his mind about going fishing that morning. A man that just happened to have a bilge pump, a tow rope, and a push pole. A man that just happened to be named Mark, a name that means rescuer or defender. A fisherman who fished a man out of peril. The irony isn't lost on me, guys. Some say it's a coincidence. Coincidence. Yeah. I don't think so. No. I'll say this. It's good to be confident. It's good to be skilled. It's good to know what you're doing. It's good to be good at it. But prideful arrogance, that'll earn you a lesson in humility really fast every time. And sometimes God has to strip away everything, your tools, your options, your pride, your opinions, to remind you who's really in control. I'm not invincible. I'm just a man. But I serve a God who is. And on that cold, miserable day in November, when I had nothing left but prayer, He was enough. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Southern Drawl Podcast. We're going to bring you more content like this. If you did enjoy it, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share the channel with friends, anyone who might also enjoy this type of content. Also, tell us how we're doing in the comments. And until next time, guys, be free, be blessed. Peace. Blindly walking, I'm so lost. Gone for quite some time. Forgetting all that I once loved. Feel like I'd die.